Welcome, everyone. So outside, you know, the whole world's falling apart. That's the destruction phase. There's a lot of stuff on the main stage about the destruction phase of the fiat world, right? You're going to get a lot of content on all that stuff. What we're talking about here is the better part of that story. It's the rebuilding phase. It's the creative time, right? We're destroying all the old crappy world. But here, we're going to be talking about the foundation of, I think, a golden age that's coming, a creative golden age where business models align with incentives that will actually make us happier, healthier, and wealthier. So, first of all, right, we've heard a ton of people. The most obvious, clear case out there that's actually being implemented now, we can see it from MicroStrategy, we can see it from maybe what Tesla's been doing, we're not so sure, but we think. That's just saving in Bitcoin, right? Just saving your money and what that does to a corporate balance sheet, what that does to your capacity to pivot and not be beholden to shareholder value and extraction of all kinds of weird numbers. It really just comes down to price discovery and the ability to save in something that takes probably not as much IQ to figure out than a Series 7 license to trade on Wall Street. So first of all, just that scene, you know, how important is it that Bitcoin can be an actual balance sheet instrument to actually change business models altogether? So Mir, you're first up, you're next to me. I know you love this stuff, and I know you've been doing it for years, helping banks in Italy, helping folks in Switzerland understand what's going on, and that it's not what they think it is. It's totally different. So first up, just a bit on that balance sheet piece.
Well, I still think that is an investment for the future. Right now, as a sort of a liability to add Bitcoin in a spreadsheet is just like saying to other people and to other people in business, look at me, I'm doing something different, and people don't love that you are doing something in a different way. You are playing a different game. But of course, since we are Bitcoiner, I think it's the best bet you can bet for the future, for yourself and for your company. So we have to watch this in a long-term perspective. Otherwise, it will be really weird and strange. And at this moment, things are changing, but there are not plenty of companies that are doing that, except for MicroStrategy, of course. But things are slowly being different, and people are investing more, even small companies that we are not aware of. There is not only MicroStrategy in the space. So if you have a company, please consider, even if you are not in the Bitcoin space, probably, especially if you're not in the Bitcoin space, think about your future and the future of your company. And it's a great insurance for that.
So I heard a reference, let's say, to time preference and this idea of slowing down your appreciation of what's happening versus like instant gratification and those things. And that's something that I've noticed that Bitcoiners exhibit, and talking about Bitcoin in a company, inside a company, on a balance sheet. One of the things that we have seen from Bitcoiners is that passion that they have, right? I've been working in Bitcoin companies now, or adjacent in some crypto things. I worked for CoinDesk when it just started. And one of the things I used to say at CoinDesk all the time was, we got to hire the religious, right? Let's not hire not Bitcoiners, because we're going to get into trouble. Do you guys see that, this human capital element? You can't get a MicroStrategy without a Michael Saylor. I don't think they could have got to the point where they did at Tesla had it not been for Elon's, impression of things. So just this piece about valuing and prioritizing Bitcoiners when it comes to hiring, because it's like no one wants to hire anyone from Harvard anymore, right? That's a scam. But this Bitcoin thing, using that as a filter for human capital, how important do you think that is? Do you think that is a good strategy to start a company and to build your business model around, to really have that priority for Bitcoiners to be part of the human capital?
I would say, as Bitcoin being the largest ecosystem in the crypto space, that it's always the best one to be a part of, and also probably most likely the one that will last the longest. And so I think that really devoting your time to something that is going to be a stronghold in the space is always a great option in the terms of putting your eggs in a basket. And I also think, as you said, you can't have Tesla without Elon Musk. You can't have MicroStrategy without Michael Saylor. I do believe that you do need to dog food, what you're talking about. Like for my own company, it was a problem that my co-founder and I had and related to our crypto holdings and couldn't get qualified to buy real estate any other way. And that's how we kind of came up with this idea and iterated from there. And I think that it's all about personal problems. And I think that for the Bitcoin folks, that once you dive into the space, it's very hard to get out in a positive way. That I think you only want to accumulate more, and it becomes much more, as you said, like a religion.
Now, when I also think of the human capital in terms of history, I've often used that to sort of predict where Bitcoin is headed, and I'll tell you what I mean. So, the mailing list, the cryptographers were kind of first, right? They joined in, and then it moved into political spheres where people would abandon their political careers 10 years ago already for Bitcoin. Wall Street came next. They were kind of non-sentimental, but also were like, well, I'm sick of Wall Street pornography. I want real risk. So they weren't there necessarily for Bitcoin, but they were there to not, be involved in pornography and to actually do the thing for real, risk and maybe win. Artists came next. You saw them sort of peeling off with the early Rare Pepe thing. But now we're seeing more and more of institutional investors and folks that are really coming from a very sophisticated background. And we haven't really seen that kind of access into the industry. So do you see that? Do you see the best and brightest that come from the finance industry, the ones that don't want to play fake risk porno, that want to do it for real? Is that really a difference? Is that something that you think could actually help bring the real playable characters, the stronger characters, the ones who really understand risk?
Yeah, definitely. And in K33, we are working with high net worth family offices. And what's very interesting to see from the private wealth segment is that we actually have some family offices who care about the self-custody part, not only the speculation of holding it on your balance sheet. I mean, it's nice that BlackRock is building an ETF, but that doesn't give you the kind of the capabilities that Bitcoin truly has, that you can have self-custody, not have counterparty risk. And I think especially from private wealth, that's where you have institutions, if you like, that really know how to deal with time preference. Some of the family offices that we speak to and work with, they have their wealth because they were able to hide it from Nazi Germany. They understand the risk of the government coming and taking your money. And they are not very interested in investing in MicroStrategy or a BlackRock ETF because, yes, it's a nice way to wrap the financial exposure to Bitcoin's kind of price, but it doesn't give you any of the real values.
Well, I like what you said about the time preference, and I'd never really thought of Europe in that sense being at the forefront of distrust for government, in a sense, right? But I think what you're saying, it feels true to me. I hadn't really thought of it that way, but I could see it, right? A lot of people in Europe have been chased around. I remember hearing stories of the Rolling Stones in their time when it was really out of control with the taxation that they had to go hide. Apparently it was a good idea back then to hide in France. That got shut down, right? Can't do that either. But when you talk about the time preference and you talk about the shift that is happening in families understanding the need to preserve their wealth, I even think of it in more practical terms, just about consumer culture and Bitcoin and how we ended up in this consumer culture that we're in with the instant gratification, with the low quality products, with things that are less good quality being more expensive than they ever were. One of the things that I even have thought of Bitcoin as a contrast to cryptocurrencies is that we're not waiting for the Bitcoin 2.0. We've understood that didn't work. It's not an iPhone. It's not a Super Nintendo. It's something totally different. And the promise of actual capitalistic incentives that would make things cheaper, more efficient. Like we don't see it in the car industry. There's more parts in a car now. It's more complicated to build a car than it ever was. And that makes no sense. We've had 100 years of experience perfecting the designs of an automobile, and it's gotten more complicated, more expensive. That whole piece about building to last, how do you inject that idea when someone doesn't even know they're part of a fiat consumer culture scam based entirely on dopamine delivery? How do they not know? How do you get past that drug addict aspect and explain and inject this sense that we're entering a world where perhaps things become cheaper because we're sharing innovations, we're sharing efficiencies, and we're motivated and incentivized to do that. How do you approach that question with offices?
Well, first of all, I think the majority of people think that capitalism is the same as consumerism. So the first things you have to address is to make people realize that those things are very, very different, and they are fighting most of the time against consumerism, not against capitalism. And capitalism can be a good thing, and that's the thing that made us in the Western world prosper, and also in other places the world will be thanks to Bitcoin. So I think the first thing would be this one, and the second would be showing a practical, physical example of Bitcoin economies. We have right now plenty of Bitcoin circular economies all around the globe. There have been since 2014, since the first year. Arnhem, for example, here in the Netherlands was one of the first. So you show how those people are building with Bitcoin. They are building, recycling Bitcoin, and all the resources, the providers are paid in Bitcoin, the services, the goods are paid in Bitcoin. And see and watch what's happening, how the situation are changing because of Bitcoin and because of this type of companies. I don't think there's nothing better than good example, and we have plenty.
Well, I agree. I've often thought that Bitcoin meetup culture, for example, has been more efficient at teaching financial literacy, media literacy than any university ever has. We're already seeing education models, media models, right? The P2P network kind of extends beyond just a financial transaction network. It extends to, filtering out fake news, things like that, right? But when I think of all of this stuff coming together, it looks like the foundation of the Bitcoin citadel economy. And what I mean is, you've got Elon Musk in Texas now talking about building a freedom city, a city from scratch. We've heard the El Salvadorians talk a little bit about a city coming out of nowhere, built with Bitcoiners, by Bitcoiners. I think Trump has mentioned the possibility of building 10 freedom cities from scratch out of nowhere. The idea of a business model around containing these separate breakaway economies. Do people in the high net worth industry ever think about this? Do they ever come around and say, can I get into the city engineering business?
Maybe not, but I think what they can really realize is that having flexibility to move around the world, if you would have to, is important. And the very concept of like a city-state, that you have these pockets of kind of different freedoms and regulatory arbitrage, is something that is appealing to them and something they are used to navigating. And then they understand that Bitcoin actually comes with the extra value that you can bring your wealth with you. And not only that, most of these family offices don't want to invest all their wealth in Bitcoin. But what they're starting to realize is that they can have a lot of their wealth in Bitcoin, keep self-custody, but have it denominated in other assets. If they prefer, say, an exposure to the stock market or to dollar, they can still hold it in Bitcoin, enter a contract for difference with a financial counterparty like us, and then rebalance that Bitcoin holding, say, on a weekly basis. Maybe on Lightning you can stream that rebalancing in real time in the future. That means that up until the point when your society collapses around you, you rely on the trust of kind of weekly rebalancing. You track the value of the assets you prefer while keeping self-custody of the Bitcoins. Then something collapses. Well, then you're full risk on Bitcoin exposed, but you can then bring those Bitcoins with you. So I think those are the types of things that family offices are much more interested about. I think a lot of these fascinating kind of closed economy or like circle economy projects are cool, but I don't necessarily believe that that is what will be kind of adopted more broadly.
I've got I was just talking with Mir off stage about this. World War II in America, the symbol of it ending, the symbol of World War II ending, was the highway network, a civil engineering project that the president brought over that he had learned from Europe, brought over, installed in America. They built this huge Eisenhower highway system, right, where you can get from every town. Now, one of the things that people always say, who's going to build the roads on a big, what are you going to do about the roads, guys? Who's going to build them roads? The idea of personal responsibility, of voluntarism, the political movement behind it, the ability to start even building physical infrastructure as Bitcoiners. The idea of a business model actually being capable of building physical public infrastructure that other people can use, that anyone can use, but is not built off taxation and other things like that. My idea is to actually build a bike trail so we can use the e-bikes, and I call it the Nakamoto Trail. We can build a bike trail around North America. So North America, given its scale, could actually become like Amsterdam. You can get around on a bike, and it's really hard to get around out there. There's so many bikes. It's amazing. We love it. But the idea of actually building physical infrastructure using the incentive structure behind Bitcoin, as people who deploy capital, who understand that world, is this a conceivable universe for you? Now, I say it because I like to get people to think, and I think I can do it, but we're not quite there. Is that something that you guys see as a change in how people might even build businesses in the future?
Sure. I mean, I think between Bitcoin and real estate, they're the two greatest wealth creation tools that have ever really existed. And I would also say, being US-based and eventually moving globally, that one of the best things that the US does right is the real estate, with especially the amount of financing that you can get. It makes purchasing properties much easier than it is most places else in the world. And this is one thing that we've really tried to combine, using Bitcoin as just purely a form of collateral, because we think as just a store of value, if you had an insurance policy, if you had stocks, if you had bonds, if you had a yacht, if you had paintings, you could take a loan against it very easily. But with Bitcoin, it's not as easy to have it in as we've learned from last year, most of the lenders that were out there used rehypothecation and other methods that we don't really want to continue in the business. So it's really rare to have someone where you can leverage the asset value of a property and also leverage the asset value of your crypto holdings. So you have a bigger basket to get better preferential terms against. But I think if you could hold Bitcoin and you could hold physical real-world assets, using both as collateral together to grow your personal wealth or for your own personal development, as you said before, I really see a really large market for that in the future.
Yeah, my vision for that trail is exactly that. It's people voluntarily donating Bitcoin for using the infrastructure and then collateralizing that Bitcoin and paying people to extend the trail. And because it's not a car road, you don't have to have professional engineers. It's a bike path. Anyone can build it, right? So you can actually draw on it. So I love that you made that connection. Now, I was working for Kraken at the time where Kraken first got the banking license in Wyoming. And my job as a strategist there was to answer the question, what the hell is a Bitcoin bank? Because the point of the license was to not get thrown in jail for doing Bitcoin stuff. But then once they got it, it was like, well, how can we make money off of this, right? Now, the thing about the Kraken license is we were not allowed to do fractional reserve lending. That's the way the license worked. So my job was to come up with a way to organize and arrange what the business would look like. And what I said was the most important thing to do was to create a proof of reserves tool, because in a world where we do have a Bitcoin standard and we're not just measuring the data point of dollars to Bitcoin anymore, how much Bitcoin you actually have at your establishment becomes a really important reference point because of this collateralization piece, right? So it was nothing more than projecting confidence in the in the enterprise by showing that Bitcoin is there on the balance sheet as a because before fractional reserve lending, that's what it was. How much the credibility of your bank was, do you have deposits or not, right? So getting back to that world of real world assets from which to draw from, and thinking that through as a much more important piece of the business model. Do you think that what you're offering, this collateralization product, can really become the foundation of most corporate expansion, let's say?
Yeah, I definitely think that if you have a lot of Bitcoin especially, there's not a lot of really good things you can do with it besides hold it. And I also think if you're holding this large asset that's worth, a considerable sum, why not collateralize against it? Because you can do it safely, especially through the right partners. And one of the things that we also created through our platform, Self-Shill, that we also allow people the ability to trade into cash or into another crypto, such as Ethereum, while loans outstanding, which is kind of what mimics what happens in a stock loan in traditional finance. So you have a lot more mobility where you're not just locked in, especially if you're buying property. This is really important because you can't usually sell with less than a month, even in cash deals. So you don't want to be exposed to market movement for extreme periods of time. And also with the introduction of derivatives, there's a lot more hedging that can be done. And I think that that's really the key part to bringing Bitcoin and real estate together for private enterprise, because the stability is important. And especially that's been a big detractant to, I think, a lot of traditional folks in the space where they go, oh, I don't understand, the value moves up and down way too much. How could you ever hold this? As all of us, most likely know from being in the space a long time, we've seen it get cut in half, a few times, and it's all come down, but it's all gone back up over time, and it's all about the belief that it'll continue to grow and assets will accumulate.
Mm-hmm. And if I just can add a comment, because there's a general misunderstanding of terms when it comes to reserves. Because if you have a Bitcoin bank that accepts, say, $1,000 worth of Bitcoin as collateral and lend out $500, then you have zero reserves, because the asset you have is $1,000 worth of Bitcoin. What you lent out was dollars. Reserves is defined as the same asset as what you lent out. What you do have, however, is a very liquid balance sheet. You have an asset that is traded 24/7, 365 days a year, and that is extremely powerful. That is why I think Bitcoin will be kind of dominant in financial structures as a collateral in relation to contract for difference, in payments, where you use it as a kind of payment rail, but it's because of the liquidity. And it's important to not mix up over-collateralized with reserves.
I like that distinction, and it's important to think about because it's a different way of doing it, right? We've been able to get all this liquidity out of thin air. We've been able to find all kinds of new ways to finance things, but it looks like we're at the end of the capacity for things like this. So we're headed back to the start, right? We're headed back to when things were simpler, when things didn't require, whatever education you two have had, right? Which we're great, we're glad for here in our entertainment value that you have it. But this idea, again, that we can actually make things simpler. Because what I see in the modern world is a confusopoly. I can't even go to America right now and try and buy a phone at a phone store. See how that goes. See how long it takes you to buy a phone at a phone store. It's all day, right? So almost nothing works anymore. Almost everything is broken. And there's a certain amount of simplicity that has to return to the equation. And when you mention the time preference, when you mention those aspects, right, it shouldn't be that hard to buy a phone. It shouldn't be that hard to participate in the modern world.
Yeah, I completely agree, and we have the possibility with Bitcoin to build from scratch. And I was mentioning before about the circular economies, but at the same time, we have to deal in this phase of transition with so many of these bothering things. So we have to come up with idea to transition in the best way. And so we have to use a lot of our creativity, a lot of our lateral thinking to deal with the things we have to deal in everyday life in our businesses.
It's not easy, that's for sure. There's so much going on out there, but I continue to be inspired by Bitcoiners. I continue to be optimistic about the future. So let's end on a term of optimism here. Let's think about when, we're talking about Bitcoin business models. When is this idea? So I see it already it looks like the new pump for the crypto scene is going to be not enterprise this time. It's going to be commercial something or other. Businesses using crypto is what they're saying is going to happen. So how long until you think that this Bitcoin, is this going to be something that people reference in this next model, in this next market? Is this going to be something that catches on and that people can reference easily? Is it going to be a contrast to what we see in the crypto scene? Are they going to merge together? When does this become a touchstone for rebuilding this broken world?
So I think also for the next wave, it's probably going to be mostly about investment, but then from an even broader spectrum of investors, now including private wealth and institutions. So it's mainly going to be about price going up. But on the back of all the liquidity, all the infrastructure, and regulation being built out around facilitating exchanging, that's what can unlock the really powerful possibilities where you can leverage the programmability, leverage the borderless nature. You can start to see Bitcoin in cross-border payments at scale. You can start to see it being used as collateral at scale. You can start seeing it being used in financial contracts, and then also help facilitate economic activity. But I think that is probably another 4-year cycle after the next one.
And you're in the heart of a major change, right? Real estate and Bitcoin. I think this is the ability for them to coexist is probably limited. Let's say, right? Perhaps.
Definitely,
yeah.
At least in current scope. I only think it's going to increase over time. Really, the only folks that are doing lending right now are private lenders, at least in the US. I think it's going to take a very long time between having regulatory changes and allowing bigger institutions to kind of step in. But as I said before, I really believe that between Bitcoin and real estate, there's not a better wealth creation tool that exists. It's just all about scarcity at the end of the day, and something that cannot be replaced. And I think combining the two together, especially how one has, let's say, greater stability, let's say, in the land value, but also you have the liquidity of Bitcoin itself. So you kind of trade off the positives and negatives of both to really create a hybrid structure that I think is very advantageous.
Great. And Mir, last word to you. We're a little over, so we'll keep it quick.
I completely agree with everything. I think Bitcoin is up, but we are going to see major things in the next years, but I don't think that model will be accepted as easy. Probably it would be called something like crypto, blockchain. It's going to be something vintage like that, business model. Yeah.
Decentralized P2P.
Yeah, exactly. Probably a reference with a vintage term, but in a new way, so people will say, oh, this is the new hype, I wanna be in it. Let's see what happens, but I think I'm right.
So that works. Don't be afraid by scammy, hypey names. Participating in generational financial crimes is just part of the game, right? We got to do it. All right, thanks everyone. Thanks for your attention. Thanks for your time. Please give a nice warm round of applause for our guests. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you, Miami, for the last 3 years in this amazing city. The whole world shut down, but Miami welcomed us with open arms. We want to show Bitcoin to the whole world. We are taking the conference on the road to set the stage for Bitcoin in a new city. Nashville. Bitcoin 2024 is coming to Nashville in Tennessee, a city that is known as a music and freedom city. Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville from July 25th to 27th.